Que tout le monde.
I will now call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 31 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Official Languages. Pursuant to the order of reference of Monday, May 30th, 2022, the committee is resuming its study of Bill C-13, an act to amend the Official Languages Act to enact French language used by private enterprises under Federal Jurisdiction Act and to make related amendments to other acts. Today's meeting is being held in a hybrid format pursuant to the order of the House adopted on Thursday, June 23rd. Members may participate in person or with the Zoom app. To ensure that the meeting runs smoothly, I'd like to pass along some instructions to witnesses and members. 1. Before you speak, please wait for me to recognize you. If you are participating via video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic. Please mute yourself when you're not speaking. 2, regarding interpretation, for those on Zoom, you have a choice at the bottom of your screen between floor, English, or French. For those of you in the room, obviously you can use the earpiece and choose the desired channel. I'd like to remind you that all comments from members and witnesses should be directed to the chair. For those in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise your hand function. The clerk of the committee and I will do our best to keep the speaking order, and we thank you for your patience and understanding in this regard. As per our routine motion, I'd like to inform the committee that all witnesses have completed the required login tests prior to the meeting. I'd now like to welcome our witnesses, but there's a new member who has just joined us, Mr. Brassard. My colleague has to say that. But welcome to our witnesses.
Sera représenté par Madame Vanessa.
Represented by Ms. Vanessa Herrick and the Ordre des traducteurs, terminologues et interprètes agréés du Québec. Represented here by Mr. Donald Barabi, the President. Witnesses, we usually give you 5 minutes for the presentations, and after that, we go to questions. So if you don't have time to complete your presentation, you can do it indirectly when you answer the questions that are put to you. So the first 5 minutes goes to Ms. Vanessa Herrick.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm going to be addressing the room in English today, mais je suis confortable aussi de répondre des questions en français ou anglais, ça dérange pas.
But I'd be pleased to answer your questions in French or English.
And I'm the Executive Director of the English Language Arts Network. A little bit about us. We're an organization, a not-for-profit, that connects, supports, and creates opportunities for English-speaking artists and cultural workers of all disciplines in every region of Quebec. We share expertise and resources for career advancement, funding opportunities, employment opportunities, and calls for participation in the arts. We advocate for our members' interests and make common cause with the Francophone community. I want to start today by, of course, thanking the committee for inviting us to present. And I'd like to say that we're joining today to share the experience of our community as English speakers in Quebec and to stand as allies with our French-speaking partners and colleagues across the country. The attention being paid to the issue of protecting French in our country is paramount, and we're ready to support and add our efforts to this work in any way that we can. We believe that one community can be raised and celebrated without there being any negative impact on the other. We greatly commend the work being done by the committee and by so many others in the government to ensure that Canada is a country of at least 2 official languages. So I'm here to speak about the experience of English-speaking artists in Quebec. I have 5 minutes. I'm going to do my best. I am going to read a fair amount so that I don't miss things that are important. I hate reading when talking to people, so forgive me as I stare at the desk, but I want to make sure I get through things. First, to speak a little bit about artists in Quebec. Quebec is, of course, a province that celebrates its culture and its art. And I will give credit to, despite whatever language tensions may exist and may be increasing under Bill 96, we are living under a government that does support the arts. And I want to make that clear. We feel that support. But what is a unique experience for artists in Quebec is that the linguistic divide does impact artists. In 2016, English-speaking artists in the province earned less than Francophone counterparts, on average making a median income of 85 cents for every dollar made by a Francophone artist. And to make that clear, an artist in Canada, and this includes Quebec, makes on average $24,000 a year, where the average median income is closer to 45. So already we're talking about people who are living very precariously. On the national level, statistics from the 2016 Canadian census show that Anglophone artists from Quebec have a lower median income than the rest of Canadian artists. These findings are especially surprising when considering that nationally, English speakers in Quebec represent a significant portion of Canadian artists. Anglophones in Quebec account for 4.6% of all Canadian artists, despite representing 2.8%. I want to make sure I say this properly. 2.8% of the Canadian labour force. The data indicates that two factors, occupation and language, are related to the discrepancies of income levels of these people. So I want to begin with a little bit of a story. This summer, when consultations were being done across the country, I had a great honour to meet and speak with a lot of people who work on this issue. And somebody said something to me from the federal government in conversations around C-13. And they said, there is no difference between official language minority communities across the country. They face exactly the same thing. And while I recognize that this is a result of the effort for the battle for equity that many official language minority communities have been searching for years, I don't think that's true. I think the challenges that we face are unique. We both face challenges. However, and I want this to be clear, yes? Am I going too slowly? Quickly?
1 minute.
Oh, God, okay. Unfortunately, English speakers in Quebec are the only official language minority community in the country with a provincial government legislating against them using their language. This is a very clear difference. This is a recent difference, but one that I think needs to be considered. We don't know for sure how Bill 96 will impact the arts directly. We do, of course, know that it will, as it impacts all English speakers in Quebec. We are hearing of discrepancies in the way that the bill will be applied. We, of course, don't know any of this for sure yet, but we are hearing that large productions coming from other places, mostly American, to be honest, coming to Quebec, will not be subject to Bill 96.
You can wrap up, Mrs. Eric, please.
Yes. So we are a community that is facing great challenges coming. And in C-13, I would like to encourage that those, I do recognize that federal legislation is not where provincial language politics should be played out, but I do encourage you to keep it in mind when you are reviewing the language and that the English-speaking community of Quebec is included in a balanced way. Thank you.
Merci. I know it's stressy because 5 minutes is too short, I know, but you'll have plenty of time to go through your presentation through the questions. Prochain, Monsieur Barabi, à vous pour...
Mr. Barabi, you also have 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to provide you with a certain number of facts. Fact number 1, translation plays a major role in our society. It permits Canadians to exercise their constitutional right to not speak the other official languages. It's at the very heart of the social contract and social fabric of Canada. Second fact, since 1995, it was decided to apply the concept of user pay for translation within the federal administration. So departments that were entitled to free translation up until 1995 now have to pay for it. The third fact, this concept of user pay has led to many abuses that were not expected. First of all, the departments and federal agencies have stopped translating their documents, or they only do it upon request, or then they use assisted translations or resources that aren't qualified to do the translation. And at the same time, it's preventing the Translation Bureau from serving Canadians properly, as well as the federal administration. The fourth fact is that the fact that it's not free has led to a decrease in translation budgets in all federal departments. And you know that the Government of Canada is the biggest buyer of translations, so this has led to a fragmentation of the Canadian language sector, which plays a key role in enforcing the Official Languages Act in Canada. The Treasury Board itself recognizes that the Translation Bureau is no longer able to perform its essential role of stewardship with respect to providing a secure supply of linguistic services to Parliament, the legal system, and the federal administration. Fact number 6, the making this optional and the fact that it's not that translation is no longer free has led to less diversity. English is playing a larger role. It says clearly the Bureau shall collaborate with and act for all departments, boards, and agencies and commissions.
Of translation, and all departments, agencies, boards, and commissions shall collaborate with the Bureau. Le septième fait, c'est que
the seventh fact, well, the Translation Bureau was founded in 1934 to put a halt to the anarchy that we saw in the management of translation within the federal government. And unfortunately, we've gone back to the same anarchy. So we have to rectify this situation. Fact number 8, and this is an anomaly. It's rare that I talk in favor of government institutions, but the private sector, both in translation and interpretation, are in favor of strengthening the Translation Bureau and in using their spending power in translation. And the last fact, the Minister of SPAC, back in February 2017, made the following commitment. This is a new day for the Translation Bureau. We're giving the institution its marching orders. We are trying to reverse the situation. We have a plan for new management and ensuring that people come in to fill the jobs. I have recommendations, and it's found in the White Book published back in 2021. That is to strengthen the role of the translation functions within the federal administration, enforce the Act with respect to the Translation Bureau, restore the exclusivity, and make these services free. The second recommendation is to give the Bureau the mandate to use the federal spending power and to use this spending power to develop the Canadian translation industry. The federal translation spending party is the largest in the world. So use this spending power to develop the Canadian industry, amend the OLA, and give translation its important place, and finally, provide standing funding for university training programs in both translation and interpretation. As you know, there's a scarcity of interpretation, and things need to be done to rectify this. Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation. The way that it works here, we give the members an opportunity to ask you questions. We'll begin the first round of questioning, which will last about 6 minutes each. We'll start with the first vice chair of the committee, Mr. Joey Godet. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here in person. We're so used to the virtual meeting, but it never replaces human contact. My first question is for Mr. Barabi. You affirmed that back in 1995, the Act was amended, making it the responsibility of the user to pay. Who was the Prime Minister back then? It wasn't a change to the act. It was an administrative act. The OLA is the same as it was adopted. It hasn't changed. It was simply decided, the federal administration decided, because it was Mr. Bérubé. I'll stop you right there. I have very limited time. Who was Prime Minister at that time? Jean Chrétien. He was Prime Minister. Mr. Bérubé, today here in the committee, we're here to look at C-13, a way to modernize the OLA. You mentioned in your third fact that you needed to better define the role of the Translation Bureau in the Act. Could you please clarify what exactly do you want to see in this new version of the Act? As I showed in my two first facts, translation plays a crucial role in enforcing the Official Languages Act. The word translation does not figure in the Act itself. I think somewhere along the line this should change, and we have to talk about the role of the institution to ensure that the Official Languages Act is carried out properly. You've also affirmed, Mr. Bérubé, that there were commitments made by the current government to go back to this process where translation wasn't free, but would help the departments deal with translation. We'd go back to the former model. Was this delivered right now? What should we be doing to ensure that the constitutional rights are maintained, to make sure that Canadians and parliamentarians, public servants, have access to bilingual documents in real time? According to the information I have, is that there is a blockage in the federal apparatus. That's where we have to focus our efforts. There is a problem of certification. It would, according to Actualité, and you're here to shed light on the matter, what I understood is that there are interpreters that are available, but they're not necessarily all certified. It's said that we have to go to the private sector or turn to other groups to get interpretation that is less controlled, if you like, so the parliamentarians are going to have to deal with that. Or can you confirm that that's the case? I will confirm that there is a scarcity of interpreters on Parliament Hill. Accreditation, that's the word, yes. Accreditation is managed by the Translation Bureau, and right now there is a real problem. That's why in my last recommendation I talked about strengthening the interpretation and translation programs in Canada. There are only 2 interpretation programs in Canada, and we should have more, and that requires funding.
Les interprètes qui sont accrédités, qui ne sont pas embauchés pour donner le service à la Chambre des communes.
Il y a effectivement des interprètes accrédités. Vous savez, l'interprétation se fait à la fois par des gens du secteur privé et des gens du Bureau de la traduction, des fonctionnaires. Alors, le mélange...
And so we need to be working with the Parliament, the House of Commons, and the Senate in order to establish better conditions to bring more interpreters here. Is it a question of numbers, of accessibility? We have a shortage in Canada. That's the problem. Right now, yes, currently this is a problem, and it's only going to get worse. Ms. Eric, you stated in your speech that we don't know what's going to change, but it's going to change. you need to help us help you. If you're not able to identify the impact that this will have on Anglophone artists in Quebec, and I am aware that they are a minority in Quebec, but at the same time, we have an idea of what Francophones outside of Quebec are experiencing. So we need to understand what the difference is from linguistic minorities outside of Quebec. Thank you. 6 minutes goes by very quickly. Next questions will be from Patricia Latanzio, 6 minutes.
Representative of ILAN, the English Language Arts Network, Quebec. Perhaps we can start with giving you the opportunity to answer my colleague's question. I'll start with that, as I too am interested in knowing the challenges that you face for your artists in Quebec in terms of perhaps financing or whatever it may be. If you can elaborate, please.
Well, I think that English-speaking artists in Quebec face a lot of the same issues that any other English-speaking community would. Again, I think many artists, Canadian artists, do choose to come to Quebec because it is a province that celebrates its culture and arts. However, once you are within the community, there is a very strong majority Francophone artists. If you are in a discipline where language is not key to your practice, such as a dancer, for example, the restrictions are less there, but there have always been challenges building bridges between the communities. So it manifests itself in different ways. Trying to find performance spaces is an enormous problem outside of Montreal. Trying to find partnerships with more established companies can be an issue. So the challenges are often very specific to the discipline, and often it comes to English-speaking artists are welcome to participate as long as they participate in a way that works within the work that is already being produced within the majority's vision. And I think that, that's probably a shared challenge in other areas as well. But that's one of the big ones. And then the pandemic sort of exacerbated a lot of those issues.
Madame Latanzio, je vous arrête. J'arrête l'horloge, là. On me dit chez les...
Sorry, I have to stop. It sounds like you haven't picked the right microphone, so it's like you're speaking through the computer and not the actual headset. We'll pause your time for everyone.
Is this better? Is the sound better?
Absolument. Continuez.
Okay. Sorry about that. And so how does Bill 96 impact in a negative way your group, and what can this committee do at the federal level to be able to help you? That would be my first question. And the second question would be what do you think about the court challenges program in the proposed reform law being optional, and do you believe that it should be mandatory once we finalize the drafting of this law, and how that could be a positive element for the English minority speaking community in Quebec?
I think the most straightforward, simple answer to one of your questions is how can this committee help? Well, we can ensure that the English-speaking minority community of Quebec is not left out of consideration when there is, of course, a needed focus put on the French-speaking minority communities. I think that there needs to be a balance there that will help send the signal across the country that despite the fact that our language is not under threat, our community is under threat. And specifically under Bill 96, if anything that you are doing, if any kind of production or discipline or work that you're doing requires more than 25 people, so we're looking at theater, we're looking at film, we're looking at large dance productions, you are potentially under Bill 96. All your communication will have to be in French. And what we have heard is that if you are coming from outside of Quebec, you may be exempted. But English speakers within Quebec will not be allowed that exemption. So we are specifically being targeted. And then, sorry, could you repeat the last part of the question?
Madame Latanzio, on vous entend pas.
Désolé, Monsieur le Président.
Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Deals with the Court Challenges program, and that's a program that's been put in place over the years to be able to help minority English linguistic communities go before the courts and challenge decisions that are being taken against them. So I was wondering, from your point of view, right now it is an optional a prerogative, or it's an option in virtue of the reformed law. And I was just wondering if, according to you, in your opinion, it should be mandatory, and if so, why?
I think absolutely. I mean, I think we are as a community facing a great deal of uncertainty. So any efforts being made at the federal level to show support or give a voice to the English-speaking community of Quebec would be necessary. As I said, we don't know exactly, Bill 96 has not been laid out. We don't know exactly how it's going to be implemented, but we do know it's going to impact our community. That much has been made very clear. And we know that we don't have a lot of recourse at this point. So any efforts that could be made mandatory at any level to assist us would be absolutely necessary and greatly appreciated.
Okay. And with regards to financing, can you enlighten this committee and let us know if you receive any funding from the federal government? And if so, I imagine it comes from the Heritage Department. So in the last year, if you've received any sums of money.
We've actually had two major new projects funded by Canadian Heritage in the last year that we're very excited about. One is a State of the Arts with Equity, Diversity and Inclusion. So it's a study being done around Quebec to see the situation of diversity, inclusion and equity within the arts, because it's an issue we know that the arts struggles with. And the other is for a community digital hub where we're going to be bringing underprivileged artists into an area where they can access higher level digital tools to help them begin to put their practice online, because the pandemic really obviously impacted artists enormously. So those are funded by the federal government, and they will have a great impact on our community.
Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you very much. Less than 10 seconds left.
You haven't produced a brief. Would you be able to produce something in writing for this committee for consideration?
Absolutely. It's our intention to have something done certainly within the next week.
Merci.
Juste parce que vous avez...
Time has been cut up really quickly. Before you let them finish, I think we need to have the same criteria for everyone. We waited till 6 minutes, 10 seconds, and this was 6 minutes, 53 seconds. So next question, 6 minutes. Yes, point of order, Mr. Chair. I think it is important, the time, but I do trust what you're saying. Yes, I'm very strict with the 6 minutes for everyone. Next question, Mr. Beaulieu, Deputy Chair of the Committee. Hello, and thank you to our witnesses for their presentation. First question for Ms. Herrick. You spoke about your funding. Does it come mainly from the official languages program from the Canadian government? I don't necessarily know the percentage, but we also have a funding program in Quebec to support Anglophone artists. So we don't only work with the federal government, but with the Quebec government as well. I'd say about 70%. About 70% comes from the federal government. Okay, and artists, Anglophone artists in Quebec, do they have access to the same programs as Francophone artists in Quebec? Yes. There are no regulations that say otherwise. But just like other minorities,
is there an equity? They are allowed to apply the same way anyone else is allowed to apply, absolutely. Is the funding distributed equally? I have heard from artists that they don't feel that's the case. It's a very difficult thing to answer because a lot of it is subjective. But yes, there are English-speaking artists in Quebec funded by the Quebec government. But I would say many feel they have greater success with the federal government.
You mentioned earlier that Anglophone artists make less in terms of the median? Do you have the numbers? Because the median doesn't really give us a good idea of the two extremes. So do you have numbers compared to the average? So the average of Canadians? No, but you stated that Anglophone artists in Quebec make less in terms of the median. But do you have numbers on the average? No, I only have the 85%. I might be able to find more specific numbers for you. And you're basing this off of the first official language spoken. So this would include immigrants as well. That's a lot of people. Okay, and there was something that was surprising to me. In Quebec, we're really surrounded by Anglophone culture and music. It's sometimes hard to find a Francophone song on the radio. So given this context, well, what do you think about this? Yes, I think you're right. I would say that Anglophone Quebec artists have the same problem as Quebec Francophone artists.
English-speaking Canadian artists. Alors, oui, c'est un problème pour tous les artistes au Québec, non seulement les anglophones ni francophones.
Excellent.
Okay, great. For Mr. Barabé, about the Translation Bureau. You said in 1995 the Translation Bureau had to start covering all its costs in terms of translation. You said that translation is essential for the language services at the federal level, and I agree with you. So you're stating that this change in 1995 has reduced the quality of the services offered here. Yes, the Translation Bureau has a difficult role. Let's take interpretation. Bureau does not do interpretation for conferences, ministers' conferences anymore. They only work on the Hill. I'd just like to specify, though I do not represent the Translation Bureau, even though I was the vice president at one point, I retired in 2012, and before I was working for the Translation Bureau. I know that there have been translators in Quebec who have gone to court because they say that the new model is essentially making things more difficult for translators. And many say that the quality has been reduced and no longer participate in this. Can you tell us more about this? I'm well aware of it, but I can't tell you more about it. The reason is that they will be going to court, and so I don't think I can say anything on the topic. And then with Bill C-13, do you think anything could solve the problem? As I was saying earlier, I think that the importance of translation should be in the Official Languages Act. And this is in order to respect this constitutional right to be able to speak either or official language, or to not speak one of them. I think this could be added in the preamble or in the body of the text, but I think it should be mentioned. And then institutions need to implement this and enforce it. So before 1995, the Translation Bureau did all translations. It was mandatory, yes, to work with the Translation Bureau. And they did not have to pay for it. It was actually parliamentary appropriations that did this. So this was the case from its creation until 1995, so 27 years. And then it was in 1995 that the by pay concept was introduced. Thank you very much. Next question, 6 minutes from Manitoba. Thank you very much, and thank you to our witnesses today. I have questions for Mr. Barabe. Firstly, I'd like to thank you for your speech today. You shared a lot of information that we should be concerned about. You've shared the impacts of privatizing the services of the Translation Bureau. The Translation Bureau has actually reduced the number of services that they offer to in order to be able to better serve Parliament. Do you think the Translation Bureau is doing the necessary in order to ensure the respect of official language rights? Do you think that the Translation Bureau should be offering services outside of Parliament? So the mandate of the Translation Bureau, and I was careful to cite Section 4.1, the mandate of the Translation Bureau was changed in 1995. Now it's the Treasury Board, for example, that has to handle these things, basically. My next question is about translation. It's a question that very much affects us right now as parliamentarians. Right now in the House of Commons, they are studying the idea of using non-accredited interpreters to make sure that we have enough interpreters on the Hill. What do you think about this? As the president of the Ordre des traducteurs et interprètes du Québec, I have spoken to the House of Commons to share our concerns. We are concerned about the use of interpreters that have not been accredited. So I'm planning to write to them to inform them that the Ordre that I work for, as well as other organizations, are going to be suggesting practical solutions to this problem. So I could give you an idea of what we will be suggesting if you'd like. For example, a financing program for students who want to study interpretation. This would deal with the shortage problems that we have had for years. So again, if we create a funding program for students, that would be one great solution. And we share your concerns on this topic. My next question is on Bill C-13. It does not suggest amendments concerning the importance of translation, like you mentioned. It also does not ensure the protection of the Translation Bureau to ensure the equality of both official languages. It has been suggested that administrative changes will be enough. Do you think it would be a good idea to include more provisions in the bill to make sure that the Translation Bureau serves the entire government in order to ensure the equality of French and English? I think this would be the best way to guarantee this equality and to ensure that there aren't administrative changes that would harm the way things have been going since 1995. I think that would be the best way. Now, this is almost a constitutional right, so this would be very important. One more question. Do you think that the Translation Bureau is proactive enough to encourage potential interpreters to become accredited and to work for the government? I think that the Translation Bureau has its hands tied in a lot of areas, including in terms of interpretation. The reason being, their budgets have not changed since 1995, and so it's really not helping them. But I can assure you that the private sector is working very closely with the Translation Bureau in order to help them to resolve these problems. Also, all the associations in the Ordre des traducteurs et des interprètes du Québec are working to solve the problem.
I have another question. You've already give us an example, but what can the government do to encourage people going into both translation and interpretation? I think that there are two things that we need to do. First of all, strengthen university translation programs. There are only two of them. We need to strengthen these programs and add at least a third program. And the bursary programs. I had a bursary, and I joined the Translation Bureau thanks to this bursary. So bursaries and interpretation would be helpful. You have 20 seconds remaining. I'd like to add that I'm not judging you, but for young university students, the financial crisis is very serious. And so we would appreciate your suggestions and the importance that you have described. Thank you, Ms. Ashton. Next question, Mr. Richard. You have the floor for 5 minutes. Thank you. I'd like to thank the witnesses for coming today. My first question is for Mr. Bérubé. Do you support an amendment that the Treasury Board become the central agency responsible for all aspects of the Act? Listen, I have no objection to that. Would you support that? Would you support such an amendment? It depends what type of amendment it is exactly and the types of responsibilities that are to be conveyed. You said that a lot of departments use unqualified resources to deal with translation. Could you give us some concrete examples? I'll give you one. The University of Montreal received a request at the end of August from 13 federal departments and agencies that I will not name to have trainees. But there's a directive of the Treasury Board that states that the department doesn't have the right to do this, only the Bureau. So this is part and parcel of all the abuses that we've been seeing. There is a need. And we've gone right back to the situation that we had before the Bureau was established. When you said that you talked about this second translation bureau, that's what you're talking about? Yes, that's exactly it. But we're not able to have the names of these departments. No, I would prefer not to identify them, but if necessary, I could. So if necessary, we could get it. Okay. I have another question for you. In your speaking notes, you said that many departments have stopped translating their documents. Is that the case? And how can you explain this? As soon as the departments... Well, in order to explain this, I have to tell you what happened back in 1995. The Translation Bureau, in 1994, had a budget through a parliamentary vote. And when the government decided that it was up to departments to pay for translations, the amounts that were allotted to the Bureau were not distributed the same way. So that hasn't changed since 1995. However, the demand has tripled, so the department don't know where to get the money to translate documents. And one of the ways to do this would be just to translate documents upon request. I'll give you an example. My daughter was applying for a job in the public service. It was a bilingual position. But it was only, the job description was only in English. That's just an example. And that was in a department. That's interesting. Well, that's been noted. Thank you. You've talked about the scarcity of interpreters. In the short term, do you have any suggestions as to how we could maybe make an amendment to the legislation to accelerate the process? I find your perspective very interesting. We need to increase programs at the university and perhaps have a third program. But in the short term, we have quite a special situation here. Well, help the Translation Bureau by giving it funding so that it can set up a computer system that would enable Canadian interpreters to see what days they can apply for a contract for. The Translation Bureau doesn't have that. They don't have the money to do that. At the outset, and I just want to make sure I'm clear on this, we talked about amendments earlier. Can you confirm it's a draft amendment? Yes. Yes. Do you have a draft amendment? Yes. 20 seconds. Yes. Thank you very much. And we will continue asking you other questions in order to get names. I'd like to get the names of these departments because we're thinking about this internally, but I'd like more clarification. Thank you. Mr. Angelo Iacono for 5 minutes. My question is for Mr. Barabé. Mr. Barabé, in your speaking notes, and I quote, you said that the federal government is at a crossroads where Anglophones and Francophones work together to serve Canadians. You said that there are shortcomings with respect to language of work. Setting aside the exclusivity and the fact that you have to pay for Translation Bureau services within the federal government, how could we strengthen the role of translation? Can you give us some examples, some concrete examples? The best example is to be able to use the spending power of the federal government in translation. As I said earlier, the government is the biggest buyer of translation services in Canada, and this spending power should be used to strengthen the language industry. As I said earlier, Canada and translation services should be. It's the foreign countries now are buying up our language industries, and it all goes back to this 1995 decision where they fragmented the spending power of the Translation Bureau and allocated it to all the various departments. So a service director of any department is going to put out a contract for tender for translation, and what happens is that the big translation agencies turn to the freelancers, and they were able to they could have bought up other foreign in translation companies. Thank you for your explanation. What are you looking for exactly? What needs to be included in C13 rather than implementing mere administrative changes? What should we do? I think we need to really describe the importance of the role of the Translation Bureau, and this should be included in the Act. I'm going to suggest to the committee some wording that should be included in the bill. You can count on me. I will provide that. Thank you, Mr. Barabé. We want to promote high-caliber translation in both languages. Can you explain how do we ensure that this is the case when there are technological advances that are causing the whole industry of the translation to transform? Of course. So we're talking about the elephant in the room, assisted translation. This is an extremely precious tool. Automatic translation is done by a computer, but the features of a computer is that it calculates. It doesn't think. It doesn't understand. So you take an automatic translation computer, it calculates the probability. This word, well, it is highly likely that this word means this. That's how the computer would work. So it's a very useful tool. However, it has to be used very carefully and by professionals, not by documents, not for documents provided by the Government of Canada to Canadians. Thank you. What are the main issues for Quebec? 30 seconds to explain the important role that translation plays in our daily lives in Canada. This is not expressed anywhere. Thank you, Mr. Iacono. 2.5 minutes, Mr. Mario Beaulieu. Thank you. My first question is for Ms. Eric. In 2019, you stepped away from the Quebec Association, saying that the blue line didn't please the new generation. You talked about the fact that the strategy was abrasive, divisive. Could you explain exactly? Yes. First of all,
I wasn't in my time, but I was working with another organization representing English-speaking seniors, so I am aware of what happened. I think that the leadership at Ilan at the time was looking. The goal of
from Geloso sent me a text message.
The goal of our
Un instant. Angelo, Monsieur Angelo, c'est beau. OK, on reprend. J'ai arrêté l'horloge. On continue, Monsieur Beaulieu, allez-y.
One of the main goals of our organization is to build bridges and connect with the French community. We work with the Quebec government. We work with Francophones in Quebec. We value the contribution that they make to Canada, and we appreciate those who value the contributions that we make. The QCGN had a much harder line in working with the Quebec government that we just felt wasn't conducive to building partnerships. And I think that, things have changed in their organization, things have changed in ours, but some of those challenges still exist.
C'est bon. Puis, quand vous dites que le...
When you say that the government of Quebec is changing, do you think it's because they just want to make French the common language? Is it one against the other? No. In my opinion.
Official language of Quebec is French, and it should be that. We support that. We live there within the French community because that's what we want. But I don't think that it should be only French. We have a multilingual province with people who have been there. The English-speaking community have been there a long time, as many other communities have. And so I believe, again, as I said, these should be efforts in building bridges, in working together, in finding common points instead of looking for divisive points. Can it be only done in French? I think that the majority of services
Yes.
should be, certainly when you have a predominantly English-speaking community and you're talking about things like healthcare, that's non-negotiable.
Merci, Mme
Absolutely. Sorry,
Merci
I'm
beaucoup.
out of time.
Merci beaucoup. I know it's quick. Next question for 2.5 minutes, Madame Ashton.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. My questions are for Mr. Bérubé. In your brief, you said that many departments don't comply with the Official Languages Act and that certain documents are no longer translated, which we find unacceptable. Moreover, this is something that we've heard from public service employees and the media. What can the government to ensure that the Translation Bureau changes? The best thing you can do is to enforce the Act, give the Bureau its mandatory role and to ensure that translation is free for departments that require the Translation Bureau services. And at the same time, you saw from my brief that it will cost less to the federal government because then departments, when they buy translation, it costs 18% up to over 700% more than what's provided by the Translation Bureau. Yes, and these are figures. These are figures that are ridiculous. I would imagine that the excuse that's used is that back in the 90s, we know that privatization winds up costing us all more money. The Public Service Alliance said that the government is turning to contractors rather than its own employees. So how do you explain the fact that the federal government is not calling upon its own translators within Translation Bureau and is really poorly managing the Taxpayers Act? When the Official Languages Act was established, it was said at that time that there were two bureaus that served the public services, the Language Office, which provided language training, and the Translation Bureau, which did translation. The first one no longer exists. We've seen that the Translation Bureau is finding it very difficult to fulfill its mandate. When I left the TB, there were over 2,000 employees. Now, there are about 1,300. Wow. Thank you, Mr. Barabi. Thank you, Ms. Ashton. Mr. Barabi, Ms. Herrick, thank you for your testimony, which will be very useful to our committee as we do work on this bill. If you have any further information that you would like to provide us in writing,
please provide the information to our clerk here, et notre greffière va partager l'information à tous.
And our clerk will ensure that the information is shared with all committee members. So don't hesitate to provide us with any information that you feel would be relevant to the committee. That being said, we will now suspend the committee so that we can get ready for the next panel.
Donc, nous reprenons la...
So we will be starting our session again. Some things I've noticed. We have 2 new witnesses for this last hour. Please wait until I say your name before starting to speak. If you are online, I know 2 of you are, you can click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please put yourself on mute when you are not speaking. If you are on Zoom, you can use the interpretation feature. You can choose the floor, English, or French. If you're in the room, you can use the headset and choose the channel that you would prefer. I'd also like to remind you that if you would like to speak to someone, you must speak through me, firstly. Witnesses, you each have 5 minutes to do your presentation. Afterwards, there will be a question round, and you'll receive many questions. So I would like to welcome our witnesses. Firstly, Sophie Montreuil from the Association Francophone pour le Savoir. Welcome. We also have Danielle Boucher and Jean-Michel Baudry, Executive Director and Assistant Director General from the Société de la Francophonie Manitobaine. Welcome to our witnesses from Manitoba. So first presentation, 5 minutes. Ms. Montreuil, go ahead. Mr. Chair, members of the Standing Committee on Official Languages, thank you for having me here today to talk to you about the critical issue of the vitality of research in French in Canada. My name is Sophie Montreuil, and I am the Executive Director of ACFAS, association that works in the science sphere and has been for just about 100 years. We bring together French-speaking researchers in Canada as well as those who use this research. Each year, we have about 4,500 members and over 25,000 supporters. We have a large network of 6 regional organizations throughout Canada. In Acadia, in Toronto, Sudbury, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. These organizations are managed by volunteers who are students and professors who speak French and organize science activities in French in the minority context. Generally, research contributes to the development of societies and of states and their population. Francophone research in our bilingual country allows many new possibilities. It allows for the development of French vocabulary in order to share knowledge in Francophone minority communities through the media and also in the government. This allows us to share information on the realities of Francophone minority communities so that we can suggest policies that are adapted to them. Francophone research allows us to strengthen the relationship between universities and their communities. it allows for the creation of a scientific sphere in French so that young people can feel safe using their own language. And finally, it allows for the inclusion of researchers from a variety of backgrounds so that they feel free to work in French. An important study was done from 2019 to 2021 that is called Portrait of Research in French in the Minority Context in Canada. Now, what they found is very simple. Research in French in Canada is on the decline, and there is a severe lack of researchers that are producing work in French. Other studies have also shown the same thing. And so it's essential that in the modernized version of the Official Languages Act, there should be clear mention of support to the production and dissemination of Francophone research. We are happy that in paragraph 41.2 of Bill C-13, there is a commitment to establish positive members to support the creation and dissemination of information in French to contribute to the advancement of scientific knowledge in French in all fields. We're happy but not completely satisfied. We don't need much more to be satisfied, though. The Association des Collèges et Universités de la Francophonie Canadienne has mentioned that the mention of Francophonie is too broad, and so its impact will be limited. It simply helps with the sharing of information, and this has already been set out in other parts of the bill. And so we would like to suggest 3 amendments. First, let's go back to the wording that is present in the Official Languages Reform proposal. Let's add the word research and change the wording of the phrasing for positive measures in Section 6. So instead of the wording that's already used, which is positive measures can include all measures aiming to, what we suggest is positive measures include all measures aiming to. So we would like to change the phrasing that I just mentioned through supporting positive measures, the production and the dissemination of information in French. And this is through supporting research and the sphere of science in French. Thank you. You are under 5 minutes. Now we're going to Société de la Francophonie Manitobaine.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'd like to say hello from the beautiful province of Manitoba. I'd like to thank the Standing Committee on Official Languages for inviting us to appear today. My name is Danielle Boucher. I'm the Director General of the Société de la Francophonie Manitobaine. Today, I am on the territory covered by Treaty Number 1, the ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the country of the Métis Nation. The day before the National Truth and Reconciliation Day, I would like to recognize that French was unfortunately used as a colonizing tool throughout the history. Today, the SFM wishes to see the development of the Indigenous peoples and communities in Canada, and we are asking that their rights be fully protected, particularly with respect to efforts made to preserve and revitalize Indigenous languages. As a spokesperson for the Francophone community in Manitoba, the SFM wants to ensure the progress in all fields of the community with the assistance of our collaborators. I'd like to talk about three main topics: the urgency in modernizing the Official Languages Act and the importance of the linguistic clauses. First of all, I'd like to note that the SFM fully supports the claims of the demands of the Fédération des communautés francophones et acadiennes in the issue of modernizing the Official Languages Act. I would also like to refer you to the document produced by the FCFA last May called Proposed Amendments to Bill C-13, the Official Languages Act, to enact the Use of French in Federally Regulated Private Businesses Act, and to make related amendments to other acts. You have before you this brief, which has been divided into 6 topics: clarifying the role of the Treasury Board, responding to the issue of linguistic clauses with third parties, including other orders of government, ensure the effectiveness of the Francophone immigration policy, strengthen Part 7, particularly with respect to consultation, including to include Part 7 in the powers of the Official Languages Commissioner, and clarifying the definition of Francophone minorities. The work that preceded Bill C-13, which is currently being studied, was not done quickly and goes back to more than 5 years. It's the result of several studies and consultations carried out by this committee, by the Office of the Official Language Commissioner, by the Senate Committee on Official Languages, by Canadian Heritage, and by the FCFA and others. As our President, Angela Casey, indicated, and she appeared before this committee on February 14th, but prior to the tabling of Bill C-13, that any additional delay will only further weaken the position of French in our communities. Parliamentary work must continue without delay. That being said, I agree, as do the majority of other Francophone communities, that Bill C-13 doesn't have some shortcomings that need to be rectified, and I would refer you once again to the recommendations made by the FCFA. This bill represents an important step to ensure the sustainability of official language communities, but I would implore you, please don't let this legislative work disappear. The Official Languages Act has to be renewed rapidly, otherwise further damage will be done. I'd like to talk now about the importance of linguistic clauses. I'd like to explain why the issue of linguistic clauses with third parties, including other orders of government, should be dealt with more explicitly in Bill C-13. In Manitoba, certain agreements between the province and the federal government provide for the support given to developing. Could you please summarize in 15 seconds, please? In some cases, as the accord between Canada and Manitoba on early childhood education states, this includes consultation with official language communities. We are trying to ensure that our needs are reflected in Bill C-13. I'd like to thank you for your occasion and I'd like for this opportunity, and I'd like to say that I'm accompanied by Mr. Jean-Michel Baudry, my colleague. Yes, I know 5 minutes doesn't take very long; it flies by. But you will have an opportunity to clarify during the questions round. So we'll start with the first Vice Chair of the committee, Mr. Joël Godin. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank the witnesses, Ms. Montreuil and Mr. Boucher. Mr. Boucher, I'd ask that you continue with your presentation. You talked about the linguistic clauses, and you want them to be more explicit. Could you be more explicit in defining what you want for these linguistic clauses? Mr. Boucher, linguistic clauses are clauses on language. We are studying Bill C-13, which is the modernization of the two official languages, i.e. French and English. Wouldn't it be better to better define the fact that we're talking about language clauses to maintain the official languages? Mr. Boucher, essentially, in our case, we're talking about the French language in a province where we are not in the majority. What's important is, and the principle that needs to be maintained, is that at the federal level, when, for instance, you're negotiating or transferring authority to the provinces, you have to ensure that that these linguistic clauses are maintained, so that there's an obligation in terms of linguistic requirements. A right that's lost as a result of a negotiation or transfer of power between the federal government and the province is serious. And linguistic clauses are important because we have a significant federal partner and we have a provincial partner that manages services. And that's the important principle, that is to maintain or even improve these linguistic clauses when we come to transferring powers. I have another question with respect to the same issue. The federal government works with the territories and the provinces. There's a whole issue of jurisdiction. It's always delicate. Well, the provincial government, the Conservative Party respects provincial jurisdiction. So if we have how do we come up with a model that respects provincial jurisdiction? I think that's a fair point. But what we need to focus on is that we have to put things on the table. There are some things that are maybe complicated, but generally speaking, if we don't talk about linguistic clauses, this is problematic. It's crucial to us. It's important that we have a linguistic clause that will ensure our rights as much as possible. In concrete terms, let's use the example of the agreement between the Early Childhood Program, the Child Care Program. How could we impose on Manitoba this obligation to implement infrastructure to serve the Francophone minority in Manitoba without trampling their jurisdictional powers? You know, we're talking about a sensitive issue here. We respect it. I'd like to come up with some type of solution to, one, ensure that these provincial, federal agreements are done properly, and to ensure that the Francophone minority has access to services. Very good question. But what you're asking for specifically is we're asking for a door that's left open to ensure that at the negotiating table, when things are being negotiated with territories or provinces, that linguistic clauses are respected. I think Jean-Michel wants to step in. We have an agreement, and the community is supposed to be consulted as to their needs. So Manitoba, well, we're not talking about predetermined relationships here during the negotiation process. I think that the federal government would be able to negotiate with the provinces. You're telling me then that having consultation in the communities will ensure that the Francophone minority in Manitoba will be well served. You don't want to have more teeth in the legislation? You'd be happy with that? Teeth in the act? Well, we've lost you, Mr. Baudry. We've lost you. I don't know if you can hear us, Mr. Baudry. Mr. Boucher, are you still there? Can you continue? I think that with respect to the provinces and the territories and the negotiating process, I think it's very important to continue with that. But the whole issue of consultation is important. Obviously, the better we're heard, once again, we need to ensure that the bill or that the act talks explicitly about this duty to consult, which will lead to linguistic clauses that are stronger. We understand the differences between the jurisdictions. We understand that. But we have official language obligations, and we should always be able to consider them and put them on the table and see what we can do together. Thank you very much, Mr. Boucher. My next question is for Mr. Droit. You have 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I'd like to thank the colleagues who are attending virtually and in the room. I have a question for you, Ms. Montreuil. Research in French is very important, and it is declining in Canada, and it's not represented proportionally. And that is an issue that I was talking about with the vice chair sitting opposite. How can we stimulate research? How can we motivate people so that more is published in French and in the world? We have excellent researchers in Canada, and we want to ensure that they have access to infrastructure or educational institutes that speak French, to have a dialogue in French. How can that be tied back to C13? I won't talk about the situation internationally. I'm going to focus on the situation here in Canada and the studies that we've done. There 63,000 researchers work in French as of 2020, but 30,000 are in a minority situation. So divided between Quebec and the other provinces. The researchers who do research in French in Quebec don't have any difficulties compared to the other 30,000 in the other provinces. Two completely different universes. I talked about supporting research. In order to do research, you need funding. We have 3 subsidy agencies, the Centre for Innovation at the federal level, and we do have figures in the report that we published that show that the percentage of funding given to French researchers are less than that given to research in English. If that represented more or less the pro rata percentage of researchers in English and French Canada, but it's not the case. I'll give you an example. 5 to 12% of the funding applications are sent to the subsidizing bodies. They're written in French, but they represent 21% of the research community. Why this gap? Because in many cases, the student is in an Anglophone study that does the research in English, and it can't submit the. We're talking about applications that are very lengthy, but the university doesn't have the ability to read it or understand it. So the French researcher drafts the application in English, not the person's mother tongue. And so that's what happens. So there's a problem at the very base. There's no real equality between those who do research in English and French. I don't want to be confrontational. I just want to talk to you about real equality, the ability to teach in French. We should have the same amount of attention paid to French researchers. All figures shows that, unfortunately, this is not the case. And I'll let you respond. No, please go ahead. I'll react after. I'll respond after. You have 2 minutes remaining. I will be very brief. The position of my organization with respect to the bill and consultations that were conducted this summer has nothing to do with the envelopes for research. Those are the subsidizing agencies that look after that. I'm talking about the conditions of equity at the very start. Because if you want to sustain the vitality of Francophone communities in minority situations where the Francophone researchers are found, and I can't obtain funding for them, we'll talk about money eventually, of course, if I can't provide them with funding to support their efforts, not just to support the research, but to Heritage Canada has talked about knowledge in French, and they need to support the vitality of French communities in all of the provinces and cities where there are Francophone communities. As you said, I have 1 minute remaining. When you talk about positive measures, you said that instead of talking about all measures, you say, and you have to be more affirmative in the way that it's said. Okay. And you want to add the word research. In 4 lines later, talk about scientific research and the impacts that you're looking for. It's for the research chairs. The impact that you're looking for will have an impact on the research chairs. So the chairs will have to determine whether they're fulfilling their language obligations. Next 6 minutes. So that's Mr. Beaulieu. You have 6 minutes. And I'd like to thank the witnesses for their presentations. I'd like to begin with Ms. Montreuil of ACFAS. You said that French research is declining in Canada, research in French, rather. Do you think that funding outside of Quebec for universities, let's take the example of Ontario universities. There are very few Francophone universities there. Do you think that's connected? The best person to talk to you about a university institution is my colleague, Lynn Brunet, from the Association of Colleges in Quebec. Lynn and her organization are working on better funding, yes. I look at individuals. So I can't really give you my point of view on that because there's the whole issue of university funding. That's a big issue, of course, but there has to be support, stronger support, to ensure that the programs, we're talking about programs that are being cut. We have to look at the Francophone institutions that are bilingual because they do conduct research in French in Anglophone universities. If we look at Quebec, the federal funding for universities through the SSHRC or through the Canadian Innovation Fund, the federal sources of funding, from 2000 to 2007, federal funding for Anglophone universities in Quebec has increased from 34% to 38%. So we're talking about 8% of Anglophones whose mother tongue is English. Obviously, that has an impact on research in French in Quebec and also in Canada. Quebec should help research everywhere. Do you think that there could be, I don't know, some linguistic clause to rebalance this funding? I'm going to stick to what we're proposing. You talk about the subsidizing agencies. We need to ensure that these agencies help Francophone applicants to be able to put their application in French. that the evaluation process has to be bilingual, that the evaluators have to be perfectly bilingual so that when they get a file that is in French or English, that they're comfortable with both. So this is what we're focusing on. This is what we have to look at first. So ultimately, the best applications will win, but we have to ensure that the subsidizing agencies have a role to play. We have to be able to specify, for example, how many researchers are coming from an OLMC. Yes, because historically speaking, I think that the education system, the post-secondary education system has been underfunded, even not allowed in some provinces for many years. That's historical. Does that have an impact on the performance of? Shouldn't we have some type of there's the continuum of education in French, right from early childhood education to university. That's a positive issue that will at least set some new groundwork. So things are equal for both Anglophones and Francophones. Two minutes. Next question is for Manitoba. Mr. Boucher or Mr. Baudry? Statistics Canada has provided facts that show the decline in French research. Those who speak French at home, it only represent 1.1% of the population in Manitoba. Do you consider that the Manitoban government and the federal government, to some extent, do you think that there's some type of reparation that should be made? Do you feel that that's the case? Do you feel that there's any will to compensate for past injustices? But excellent question, but your 6 minutes are up. Ms. Ashton, you now have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to welcome our witnesses. Of course, I'm thrilled to see the Société Franco-Manitobaine here at the committee with us. I'd like to start on a more personal note. I've already shared this with the committee, but I am a Francophone in Manitoba. And so access to school in French, for me, I went to French immersion, has really been thanks to the Société de la Francophonie Manitobaine. They've really been fighting for us. And in our school board, we have had the opportunity to send our children to school in French so that they may be able to learn French. And this September, I had the privilege of being able to actually send my twins, my two children, to school. You saw one of them earlier, actually. But I've been able to send them to school in French here. So this is not a Francophone community, but there are other Francophones here. And so this is a school that really has seen the desire for so many Manitobans of my generation to be able to give the opportunity to their children to go to school in French. And this is thanks to your work, and this is a fight that needs to continue. We need to look at many different measures, including modernizing the Official Languages Act. And we also need to ensure that we are making up for the shortcomings that we face. And this is what we're discussing today. So once again, thank you very much. And I'd like to ask you a few questions. Mr. Boucher, We have spoken to you and with the Association de la Francophonie Manitobaine on the topic of fighting the decline of the demographic weight of Francophones in minority situations. What do you think it's important to make sure that we are increasing the demographic weight of the Francophone community in Manitoba? Thank you very much, Ms. Ashton. I'm thrilled to hear that your children are able to go to a French-speaking school. When it comes to the need to increase Francophone numbers in Manitoba, we've been able to look at the census and look at the trends that are concerning, yes. But on the other hand, I think that the association has been working for years in order to ensure that the federal and provincial governments are able to work together in order to meet our objectives. Currently, we are not meeting targets. So it's essential that we establish programs and services in order to be able to do so. We have a lot of support on this debate. The federal government, for several years, has been investing in Francophone immigration. However, something is still missing because we are not meeting targets. And I think that Bill C-13 needs to be very clear in terms of real targets for Francophone immigration, because this is one of the ways that we can close this gap in terms of demographic weight. We need C-13 to be very robust, and we've come a long way. But if it's not enough in Bill C-13, then we're not going to be able to move forward. And so the bill needs to be extremely explicit. Thank you for this. I'd like to now move on to language clauses that you mentioned. We know it's one of the priorities of the FCFA, and it's one of the measures that we support. Like others have said, we think this is one of the measures that will really give a lot more strength to the Official Languages Act. We know that the question of education is top priority for Francophones in a minority situation, such as is our case in Manitoba. However, the government is oftentimes not allowing us to support teachers. And this is the case in all different levels of education. So I can take the example of the Francophone daycare. Where I live, we have serious shortages of people who are actually able to work in these daycares in French. So we can see that there are a lot of issues. For example, immigration, a lack of funding, and this in order to help us recruit more Francophone teachers. Less than 15 seconds. We need to help education institutions find funding elsewhere. Do you think these language clauses will be important in order to deal with this crisis? Very great question, but we are running out of time. We might be able to come back to it. Next question, 5 minutes. Mr. Bernard Généreux, the floor is yours. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses. Hello, Ms. Montreuil. My first question is for you. When we speak of positive measures, in your opinion, what is a positive measure? We've been speaking at length of Bill C-13, saying that positive measures are important, but what are they on a practical level? Afterwards, we want to be able to implement them. So we need a definition to make sure that we're not inventing this. What do you think about this? Good question. No. Yes, it's an excellent question. I don't have my computer to look at the bill. There was one that I cited that I wanted to be corrected, that I've mentioned. Positive measures are a means by which the federal government can follow this law. So, yes, sorry, your mic was closed, but I understood your question. When we look at the wording in positive measures, we have to look to organizations like my own and others to make sure that we are reminding different organizations that what their rights are in terms of the bill. So we speak of supporting the creation and dissemination of information in French through supporting the scientific community. For me, this gives me the ability to speak to Heritage Canada and to tell Heritage Canada that my researchers, students, professors, and volunteers throughout Canada are doing amazing work to support French in their institutions and in their communities, and that I'm supporting them as much as I can, but I don't have the funding to do so. And in my opinion, it's our country that needs to be supporting the vitality of these communities. So with these types of positive measures, I have another tool to be able to go to Heritage Canada and ask them for this, something that is in their jurisdiction. It might seem strange to you to say that research is in the hand of granting councils and everything's handled, but no, it's not that simple. In order to support research, we need to support the well-being and development of students who will continue to do research in French, and that they may stay in their communities instead of changing provinces. And an organization such as Heritage Canada, for example, could have much more responsibility in this field. Mr. Boucher, my next question is for you. When we talk about consultations, are you happy with the consultations that have been laid out in the bill? Should we more so be looking for the requirement of results? Should things be clearer? Yes, we talk about consultations, and this is fair, but should we also be talking about results? Very quickly, I think that the consultations laid out in the bill are clear. You speak of concrete results. Well, we talked about immigration targets, for example. There are, of course, other things that could be clarified, I think. I think that this is always good, but at the bare minimum, we need these consultations. They should be done in a serious manner, meaning that we're really going to see what the community has to tell us. Sorry, but we're trying to modify this bill. We're trying to really improve the next bill for the next 40 years. Do you think that results should be included in the bill? Yes, absolutely. 5 minutes, Ms. Kayabaga. The floor is yours. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Firstly, I'd like to thank our witnesses for... Oh, can you hear me? No. Sorry, so I said thank you, Mr. Chair. Very happy to have our witnesses here with us today. Thank you for your time. I'd like to start with Ms. Sophie Montreuil. Could you say a little bit more on the question that my colleague asked about measures in Bill C-13 to strengthen research? I think you can continue with the answer that you began. Our requests in terms of amendments for the bill are actually very simple. Essentially, it is rewording one of the sections, and it's very modest, but we think that this will have a very big impact on organizations like ours. This is the first time that in the Official Languages Act, we have mentioned Francophone knowledge and research in French. So this is the first time, and so for us, it's a step forward. Now, we are asking for a little bit more. We would like researchers outside of Quebec so Francophone minority communities have better conditions as time goes on. We're hoping to be able to at least decrease or hopefully stop the decline of French research in Canada. No one will benefit from there being a lack of research on local Francophone communities or communities who speak other languages. We need research coming from these communities, and we need that diversity. Multiculturalism is very important in Canada. In our case, we focus on research in French. That's what we advocate for. And so it's important that the data that comes from this research is shown in the policies that are created. So the changes that we are suggesting, I would say, go further to make sure that we have a tighter grasp on the situation so that positive measures, so that all sectors that are targeted by these measures really be consulted, that they benefit from this addition on Francophone knowledge and the production and dissemination of information in French. Did I answer your question? Yes, thank you very much. Now, Mr. Boucher. Mr. Boucher, earlier you mentioned some of what is lacking in these Francophone communities. Do you think Bill C-13 is a remedy for this, and could you give us some examples? Sorry about my sound. I'll ask Mr. Baudry to jump in here. Yes, but if we could come back to consultations and the regulations that come from us. I was involved in something that went to court with the federal government. So essentially, what I want to say is that we want to go beyond a simple consultation. We need to then also take into account what we learn from these consultations. The government needs to look at this. So this consultation step is very important because we're going to get a variety of responses, and this will help us to make programs that actually meet the needs of Francophone minority communities. Mr. Boucher, earlier you mentioned that we need to ensure that immigration policy is strong. And this is important for communities like yours. Could you say a little bit more about this in terms of improving this in Francophone minority communities? 10 seconds. Yes, I think this is really critical in our communities. I know I don't have long, but we've been working on this since 2003. We've made a lot of progress, but we need to continue. Thank you, Mr. Boucher. Before we go into the last questions, we will need unanimous consent in order to go a little bit past our time. Do we have unanimous consent? Yes, thank you. Mr. Beaulieu, 2.5 minutes. Yes, so firstly, I have a question that you didn't have the time to respond to. Do Francophones in Manitoba, I would say since the creation of the OLA, should Manitobans actually have access to reparations? I wouldn't say that we've gotten reparations, but I think that we've been able to benefit from different support programs. I'd say that this work in making up for injustices is challenging. But when we set up consultations with communities, when we come to an agreement in terms of what we need to do, we are slowly but surely making up for things. So I think we are making progress. I'd like to come back to what Ms. Ashton said. Something that wasn't mentioned is the fact that fees to go to French-speaking programs have continued to increase. And so, yes, there is a lot to make up for, lots of progress to be made, and we hope that this modernized bill will be able to support us further. A question about LACFAS. Did LACFAS receive a mandate to advocate for Francophones? And should Bill C-13 mention this? I don't think I have much time. About 40 seconds left. Yes. So LACFAS is promoting research in Quebec, in Canada, and even on an international level in French. And we've been doing so for about 100 years. The Quebec government helps us. I think they're doing a good job. We have received funding from them, and I would also like to add that the government of Quebec has given us 2 forms of funding for Francophone research. In the coming months, we will be creating a program that is only for researchers in Quebec, or sorry, rather for Francophones in a minority situation. Thank you, Ms. Montreuil. 2.5 minutes, Ms. Ashton. Thank you, and I wanted to give Mr. Boucher the opportunity to add a little bit more to the question of language clauses. What would this mean for Francophone communities in Manitoba? Speaking of substantive language clauses, this would be for offering services that we owe to Francophones in our communities. I think my colleague can speak more to this. I think that the impact has been significant in 2020. Out of 600 daycare spots that were opened, half of them were for the Francophone community. That was from a provincial-federal agreement. Beyond consultation, governments also need to take action. It's also been recognized that the impact on minority language communities was asymmetrical if they didn't have access to daycare in the language of their choice. So I think we need to continue to work to improve the situation, and modifying this bill is very important. Now, it was said that it's been 40 years since we modified this. I hope that it won't be the case in the future. Hopefully, we will not need to wait another 50 years before we are able to make change. Yes, it's very encouraging, and thank you very much to all of you for the very hard work that you do and that the community is doing for all of us. I'd also like to ask a question to Ms. Montreuil. In your brief, you support the education system in French in Canada for all age groups. Do you think that we could add language clauses to protect Francophone services in terms, for example, of daycare? Unfortunately, I'm not able to answer this question in terms of language clauses. I know that it is very difficult in respect to education. The federal level has a hard time becoming involved in this provincial jurisdiction. So we have to respect the system, and we may need to find new ways to work. Thank you, Ms. Montreuil, and thank you to our witnesses today. if it's your first time coming, the time for each question is determined beforehand by mutual agreement. So I don't want you to think that I'm too strict. It was all determined beforehand. Thank you to our witnesses. If you think that there's other information that would be beneficial to us that you didn't have the time to send, feel free to send it to us. And you can send it through the clerk, and she will distribute it to us. Before we finish, I would just like to remind members that this Thursday there will be no committee. Next Tuesday, the last half hour will be for committee business. We will be working on the witness list and also on voting. The session is now adjourned. Thank you.